On October 12, 1983, a little before 7 in the morning, a woman named Anna Harper stepped out of her quiet Virginia house after giving her 2 kids a quick goodbye kiss and telling her husband she needed to head in early for work. She walked out with only her purse and a single briefcase, moving with the steady calm of someone following a familiar routine. But she never returned. 3 days later, her car turned up in a long-term lot at Dallas Apos International Airport, the keys sitting untouched in the ignition as if she had planned to be back within the hour. By the time federal investigators managed to connect the scattered clues, Anna Harper, the parent-teacher helper, the steady presence at school events, the dependable employee at a defense contractor, was already far away. She was sitting inside a stark debriefing room in Moscow, drinking tea and speaking in smooth, flawless Russian while answering questions she had spent years preparing for. Because Anna Harper was a name she borrowed, not one she was born with. She had never truly been the woman her neighbors thought they knew. What unfolded later became the account of how a Soviet intelligence officer spent nearly 10 full years living a split existence in the middle of American suburbia, passing classified material to the KGB while she baked treats for PTA sales, stood on metal bleachers at Little League games, and pretended her life was as ordinary as everyone else's. And when the pressure finally tightened, when subtle signs hinted that her cover was close to breaking, she made a choice that left her family with questions that would follow them for the rest of their lives. It is a story built on lies, belief, and the cold, methodical logic of espionage during one of the tensest chapters of the 20th century. But to understand how it all started, you have to go back long before Virginia. You have to picture a training site outside Leningrad in the early 1970s, where a young woman was being shaped for a mission that would chart the course of everything that followed. Her real name, revealed years later in declassified KGB files, was Yelena Mikhaevna Sukoloma. She was born in 1947 in Minsk, raised in a household with strong party ties. Her father served as a mid-level figure in the Ministry of Agriculture, and her mother worked as a schoolteacher. Early on, recruiters noticed that Yelena had the kind of mind and temper they valued. She learned fast, adjusted even faster, and had a natural instinct for slipping into the background when it helped her. Former instructors would later say that she looked ordinary in a way that worked perfectly for her work. She was the kind of person you could walk past again and again without anything sticking in your memory. Her expressions and manner shifted so easily that she seemed to become whatever the situation required.
She spoke English with only the slightest trace of an accent, the result of years of focused study that began when she was still a teenager. By the time she finished the program in 1973, she had been reshaped from the inside out. She walked away with a new identity, a carefully built personal history, and a mission that demanded she erase the person she had been. The plan set for her looked simple enough on paper. Yelena, the name assigned to her cover, would enter the United States under an identity that blended in, one crafted to pass through immigration without raising a single question. She would use a Polish-sounding name tied to a believable story about being a graduate student from Eastern Europe, a background designed to let her move through American life without attracting attention. She took on the identity of Anna Kovalik, carrying a Polish passport, transcripts from the University of Warsaw, and a polished story about leaving the communist bloc to look for a freer future in the West. The cover sounded solid. Many people from Poland had moved to America, so her reason for wanting to study in the United States would strike immigration officers as ordinary and believable. No one expected her to break into secure labs or chase after nuclear data right away. The KGB moved with patience, thinking in long arcs. They preferred to place people who might slowly gather meaningful insight over an entire working life instead of pulling off one dramatic mission. So in 1974, when Yelena, now living as Anna Kovalik, stepped into New York City with a student visa and a suitcase of gently aged American clothing. She blended in with dozens of similar agents quietly threaded through Western society. They formed a hidden web spread across continents, working out of sight during the long, tense stretch of the Cold War. Her first year in the United States matched her cover almost perfectly. She went to graduate classes at a mid-level university in New Jersey, focusing on electrical engineering. She met classmates, went out to the occasional party, and picked up small details about everyday American habits. She dated here and there, never letting anything get too deep, and held a part-time job at the campus library to add to the modest stipend routed to her through carefully cleaned financial channels. To anyone around her, she was simply Anna Kovalik, a polite foreign student, steady but not intense, the kind of person who could sit at the edge of a group photo without drawing notice. That quiet forgettability was part of the design. In 1975, she crossed paths with a man named David Harper at a community gathering in Princeton. David was 32, an engineer as well, recently divorced and uneasy in crowds. He worked for a medium-sized defense contractor tied to the Department of Defense, mostly handling technical projects like communication systems and circuit boards.
His work wasn't sensational, yet it wasn't public either, which made him the sort of contact an intelligence service might find useful. They began seeing each other in the fall of that year. By every account, the relationship was real for David. He fell for her quickly. Friends later said he thought she was bright, gentle, and straightforward in a way that felt different from the people he had dated before. What Anna felt is harder to guess, but she kept the part steady and believable. They were married in April 1976 in a small ceremony with only a few of David's relatives and several friends Anna had met through school. No one from her supposed family attended. She explained that the people back in Poland were tied up in visa problems, and David accepted that without hesitation, never imagining he needed to question her story. When she married David and stepped into his life as his wife, Anna Kowalczyk took the name Anna Harper, and under this fully American version of herself, she would work for the next 7 years. The marriage solved several needs from an operational view. It gave her a stronger, more stable cover story, one that would be far harder for anyone to pull apart if questions ever came up. The shift from Anna Kowalczyk, a Polish student who had come from abroad, to Anna Harper, an American wife with a growing family, added layers of credibility that made her almost impossible for counterintelligence to spot. It also placed her close, not in an official sense, but physically and socially, to a man tied to the defense world, someone who might chat about work without thinking or leave a folder on a desk at home. But beyond access, the marriage made her look ordinary in a way a single foreign woman living alone in the America of the 1970s never could. Married women with children were not treated as possible foreign spies. They were taken at face value, and that was exactly what her handlers wanted. By 1977, Anna and David had settled into a calm neighborhood in McLean, Virginia, a small suburb just outside Washington, D.C. Around this time, Anna had their first child, a daughter named Emily. Their second child, a boy named Michael, was born in early 1979. Through these years, Anna also kept a job, having landed a role as a technical analyst at the same defense contractor where David worked. The company, Advanced Systems Technologies, held Army and Navy contracts tied to communications gear. She had applied for the position in late 1976, and her background check, which covered her Polish immigration file and her school records, came back with no issues. The identity that the KGB had crafted for her as Anna Kowalczyk was detailed enough to pass the type of checks done at the time. By the middle of 1977, Anna Harper held a security clearance and could view material that, while not top-tier classified, was still restricted and still worth something to a foreign service. This marked the point when the mission moved from slow preparation to actual intelligence collection. Anna's duties at Advanced Systems Technologies involved going over technical specs and acting as a link between engineers and government contacts. Because of this, she handled a steady flow of paperwork tied to military contract work, development schedules, equipment performance details, and funding plans. Much of it looked dull to most people. It seemed routine, harmless. But to analysts sitting in Moscow, even routine points could matter. They showed trends, priorities, weak spots in supply lines, and areas where technology lagged. So Anna began sending information back, carefully, and with the same patience she had used to build her cover. The methods she relied on were simple by design and intentionally slow, chosen to keep attention away from her and to make each transfer blend into the background of her ordinary life. She almost never took photos of paperwork or tried to slip files onto microfilm because even a small mistake could expose her. Instead, she relied on her memory, going over details until they stuck, then turning them into short, coded notes that only one person was meant to read. She handed these off during quick, carefully timed meetings with her contact, a man working under diplomatic cover at the Soviet embassy in Washington. These encounters, called brush passes in intelligence circles, happened in ordinary spots where two strangers could cross paths without drawing a second glance. A park bench, a shopping center walkway, the edge of a museum lobby, public places that swallowed movement and noise so cleanly that no one noticed a small exchange. At times, she didn't meet him at all. She used a dead drop instead, a hiding place chosen long before she ever became part of the system. A loose brick tucked into a garden wall, a hollowed-out tree stump in Rock Creek Park, spots that had been checked, charted, and practiced until the whole process felt like muscle memory. Her contact would come by later, lift the item, and vanish again. For years the rhythm held. Anna moved pieces of information at a steady pace, not constantly, but often enough that the KGB kept receiving small but reliable packets of intelligence. A report one month, a technical outline the next. Nothing explosive, nothing that would reshape the Cold War overnight, but steady and clean, the kind of material handlers valued from an asset who never panicked, never rushed, and never broke pattern. Meanwhile, back in Virginia, her daily life followed the familiar track of suburban routine. She went to parent-teacher meetings, organized birthday parties, and helped out in the elementary school library.
She and David had settled into a pattern that looked solid from the outside. He put in long days at work, she kept the house running while juggling her own job, and on weekends they acted like every other family in their neighborhood. Trips to the zoo, dinners at chain restaurants, half-finished home projects spread out across the garage. Anyone watching them would have seen what looked like the American dream, carried out in slow, ordinary steps. Underneath, the pressure never let up. Living a double life isn't a neat split between two selves. It's a constant performance, a careful balancing act that drains a person day after day. Every small talk moment, every harmless question from a neighbor or a coworker had to pass through the filter of Anna Harper's invented past. She had to judge the risk, steer the answer, and keep the story straight without ever looking like she was thinking too hard. And on top of the practical work, there was the moral piece, the knowledge that she was lying to everyone who trusted her, including her husband and her children. No one knows whether guilt ever caught up with her. Former Soviet officers who discuss similar operations say that ideology and duty could push personal feelings aside. Still, it's hard to believe she never had quiet moments, late at night or before sunrise, when the weight of what she carried felt almost too heavy. By the early 1980s, the wider intelligence world was shifting. The Cold War, which had held a tense but steady balance through much of the 1970s, was sliding into a sharper, more confrontational stage, and the work around her was changing with it. The Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979 pushed tensions even higher, and the election of Ronald Reagan in 1980 added a sharper, more aggressive edge to how the United States handled foreign policy. At the same time, American counterintelligence was growing more capable and more suspicious. Agencies were tightening procedures, sharpening their tools, and looking harder for Soviet officers who might have slipped into universities, companies, or government offices. The FBI's counterintelligence division kept adding people and widening its reach. New methods for watching communications and tracing unusual behavior were coming online. Inside the intelligence world, there was a steady belief that the Soviets had quietly planted long-term sleeper agents across many parts of American life. Anna had already been active for almost a decade, and her handlers still treated her as a useful source. But the Soviet Union also knew that leaving an operative in place too long raised the odds of discovery. The clock was working against her, and the workload she faced kept growing. In 1982, she was told to dig deeper into a project under development at Advanced Systems Technologies, a communications encryption system meant for NATO forces in Europe.
This task was far more serious than the routine updates she had been sending earlier. Moscow viewed it as a major target, something worth extra danger and extra effort. So she pushed herself. She stayed late at her desk, took on extra duties, and made sure those duties put her near the material she needed. When she thought no one was watching, she copied documents or photographed them using a tiny camera her handler had supplied. It looks outdated now, almost like a novelty, but at that time it represented state-of-the-art spy gear. She passed each batch of material through her usual channels. For a short stretch, everything seemed to move smoothly, and her reports reached Moscow without trouble. Then, in the spring of 1983, a single slip changed everything. The exact details were never officially confirmed, but information that surfaced later pointed to one simple error. She photocopied a document and forgot to put it back where it belonged. It was a small oversight, the kind that might have stayed hidden if the timing or circumstances had been different. But someone caught it. A security officer doing a standard review of sensitive files noticed something missing. That small flag led to a deeper audit, and that audit led to a list of everyone who had touched the file. Anna's name was on that list. She was not treated as the main suspect at first, but she was close enough to the situation that investigators could not ignore her. This marked the start of her downfall, even though she had no idea at the time. The FBI was alerted to the breach and opened a quiet, steady investigation. Agents went through access records, talked to staff, and pieced together movements inside the building. Step by step, they built a picture of who had been near what, and when, and why. Anna's name kept turning up around the edges of the investigation, never right in the spotlight, but always close enough that people noticed her shape in the periphery. Something about her presence felt slightly off, not in a way you could explain in one clean sentence, but in a way that stayed with you once you saw it. Then Richard Callahan, a veteran counterintelligence agent who had spent his entire working life chasing Soviet operatives, caught a small detail in Anna Harper's past that bothered him. It wasn't dramatic. It was a tiny mismatch in her employment record, a short gap in 1974 that didn't match the timeline she listed on her security clearance forms. Callahan pulled her file again and went through it piece by piece, checking her information against other government databases and old contacts in different agencies. And the longer he looked, the more the questions piled up instead of clearing. Her Polish passport and immigration papers had markings that didn't line up with what genuine documents from that period usually showed.
They looked clean at first glance, but the closer he examined them, the more they felt like careful forgeries made by someone who knew what they were doing. Her academic history from the University of Warsaw also led nowhere. Routine verification methods stalled out, and people who should have been able to confirm her studies never responded or simply had no record of her. When Callahan tried to find anyone who remembered Anaka Kowalik from her years in Poland before she arrived in America, he got nothing. No neighbors, no classmates, no coworkers. It was as if she appeared out of thin air in 1974, stepping into a new identity with no traceable life before that moment. By the summer of 1983, the FBI had launched a full counterintelligence investigation into Anna Harper. They still didn't have solid proof that she worked for the Soviets, but they had enough scattered signs to justify watching her. They tapped her phone, tracked her routine, and sent agents to quietly speak with people around her, asking vague, cautious questions about how she behaved, what she talked about, and what they knew of her past. David Harper wasn't told any of this at first. The FBI worried he might unknowingly warn Anna, and there was also the uncomfortable possibility that he might be involved. Until they cleared him, everyone close to Anna was treated as a potential part of the puzzle. For several months, nothing meaningful surfaced. If Anna was a spy, she ran a tight routine and left no obvious signals. She worked, came home, looked after her children, showed up at school events, and moved through her days as if she had no idea she was being watched. Then, in September 1983, the pattern shifted. One surveillance team saw her drive to Washington, D.C. on a Saturday afternoon. She told her husband she needed to handle some errands. Instead, she went to a shopping center in Georgetown, parked, and spent around 40 minutes wandering through a handful of stores. During that window, she passed close to a man, later confirmed to be a Soviet intelligence officer working under diplomatic cover. The moment between them was brief, hardly more than a few heartbeats. They walked within a few feet of each other, said nothing, and kept moving. The whole exchange lasted less than 10 seconds, but it was enough to raise every alarm the investigators had. To the surveillance team, the scene looked like a clean brush pass, just a brief moment where Anna could have slipped something into another person's hand without drawing a second glance. It was the kind of tiny movement that experienced watchers notice only after hours of staring at the same faces in the same streets. For the FBI, this was the sign they had been waiting on for a long time. It still fell short of what they needed to justify an arrest, but it was enough to show that their earlier doubts were not guesses.
It pushed the whole investigation into a sharper, more urgent phase. More people were assigned, more equipment came online, and the monitoring around Anna grew steadier and far more detailed, almost around the clock. The idea was simple: keep her in sight until she reached out to her handler again, gather a stack of solid proof, and then move in at a moment that would let the FBI take down not just Anna, but everyone tied to her. What they missed was how alert her own side was. Her handlers were following the situation as closely as the Americans were, and the KGB had a way of moving fast when they sensed one of their operatives had reached a breaking point. In early October 1983, Anna received an emergency signal from her handler. It came through a method the two of them had set up long before, something subtle, something easy to miss unless you knew exactly what to look for. No one has ever pinned down the exact channel, but the most likely version is a coded line hidden in a newspaper ad or a short phone call with a phrase they had agreed on years earlier. However it arrived, the meaning hit her immediately.
Her cover was gone. The FBI was too close, and staying put meant risking everything. On the morning of October 12th, Anna Harper made a choice that would reshape her entire future and leave a permanent mark on the people she cared about. She got up before sunrise, helped her children get ready for school, cooked breakfast for David, and kept her voice steady, acting as if nothing around them had shifted. She told David she had an early meeting at work, something she said often enough that it did not raise suspicion. She hugged Emily and Michael, kissed them goodbye like she always did, and stepped outside carrying her purse and a briefcase that looked ordinary from the outside. Inside that briefcase, according to what investigators later reconstructed, was roughly $15,000 in cash, a set of false identity papers prepared by the KGB years earlier for exactly this kind of escape, and almost nothing else. She left behind her wedding ring, every family photograph, and all the small personal items that tied her to the past 9 years of her life. She drove to Dulles International Airport, parked a car in a long-term lot, left the keys sitting in the ignition, and walked away without looking back. From the airport, she most likely took a taxi or shuttle to another part of the area, changed her clothes, and used the forged documents to get onto a chain of flights designed to hide her trail. No full record of her route has ever been confirmed, but intelligence analysts believe she went first to Mexico City, then continued to Havana, and finally on to Moscow. The whole escape, from the moment she stepped out of her house to the moment she reached Soviet territory, would have taken less than 48 hours.
By the time the FBI understood she had slipped away, she was already out of reach, sitting in a guarded apartment somewhere in the Soviet Union. KGB officers were questioning her, pressing for every detail she had gathered during her years in America. Meanwhile, in Virginia, on October 12th, David Harper returned from work and walked into a quiet house with no sign of his wife. At first, he figured she was held up somewhere or had decided to stop somewhere after work without leaving a note. But as the evening dragged on and the night settled in with no call, no message, nothing at all, his concern grew into real fear. He tried her office, but no one there had seen her. He reached out to friends, hoping someone had heard from her, yet every answer was the same. No one knew anything. By the next morning, with still no sign of her, he filed a missing person report. That was when the FBI came to him and told him the truth he never expected to hear. His wife was not who he believed she was, and the chances of her coming back were almost non-existent. The news hit hard and spread fast. David was crushed, and everyone who had known Anna Harper was shaken. Her co-workers struggled to make sense of it. Her neighbors refused to believe it. Her children, Emily and Michael, who were 6 and 4 years old at the time, were left with questions that would follow them through their lives, questions no one could fully answer. David cooperated with the FBI without hesitation. He sat through long interviews, opened his home for searches, handed over financial files and personal papers. After a thorough review, the FBI decided he had been nothing more than a victim, a man who married someone he knew as Anna Kowalczyk, later Anna Harper, never realizing she was working for the Soviet Union. But knowing he wasn't at fault didn't make the betrayal easier to live with. In the years that followed, he stepped away from the life he once had. He moved with his children to another state, trying to piece together something stable after everything had fallen apart. The FBI continued digging into the story of Anna Harper or Yelena Solonkova for years, but the effort produced little. The Soviet contact she had worked with was expelled in a larger diplomatic move, yet another operative soon filled the gap, and the network she served kept running. Analysts reviewed the classified material she had taken. Some of it mattered,
Some of it had value to the Soviets, but none of it was judged disastrous. She had been steady and capable, not exceptional, and her reports did not shift the larger Cold War struggle. As for Yelena, she vanished into the Soviet system and never surfaced again in any public way. Rumors floated around, a new identity, maybe a new mission, maybe more intelligence work under another name, but nothing was ever confirmed. Her trail ended the moment she crossed that border, leaving only the damage, confusion, and unanswered questions behind her.
Some former intelligence officers who left the Soviet Union in later years said they had heard about her. They described her as a warning story used in KGB training. They talked about an operative who held her cover for almost a decade, stayed steady through long stretches of quiet work, and then lost everything because of one mistake. No one knows if she ever thought about the family she walked away from. No one knows if she felt regret, guilt, or anything else. The only clear fact is that she never tried to reach David, Emily, or Michael. Not once in all those years. The case of Anna Harper, also known as Yelena Sokolova, was not rare in the Cold War, but it showed a specific kind of operation the Soviet Union relied on. These were long-term, deep-cover agents who slipped into American life, set down roots, formed friendships, and collected bits of intelligence year after year. They did not live like action heroes. They were not James Bond types racing through cities with stolen plans. They worked slowly. They followed routines. They gave up huge portions of their own lives for small pieces of information that might matter later. And the mental strain was heavy because the job demanded a full, constant act. Every part of their life became part of the cover. Every moment had to match the story they lived. What makes the story hit harder is not the spycraft, but the people caught in it. David Harper had to face the truth that the woman he loved and built a life with had never fully existed, or rather, the person he thought he knew was a version shaped for a mission, not for a marriage. Emily and Michael Harper grew up without their mother, and with the painful knowledge that she chose to leave them instead of staying and accepting the consequences of her choices. And Yelena Sokolova, wherever she finally settled, had to carry the weight of knowing her children would grow up asking questions she would never be able to answer. The larger fallout from the case spread far beyond one family. Anna Harper's escape exposed weak points in American security clearance checks and background review systems. Agencies like the FBI rushed to patch those gaps and rethink how they screened people. Her disappearance also fed the steady paranoia of Cold War counterintelligence. It reminded investigators that Soviet operatives could be anywhere, hidden in normal jobs, living quiet suburban lives while gathering information for the other side. Later discoveries about other Soviet agents working inside the United States showed that this fear was not groundless. But the fear had its own costs. It pushed suspicion into workplaces, neighborhoods, and agencies. It placed innocent people under investigation simply because something in their history looked unusual. And in the shadow of stories like Anna Harper's, many found themselves trying to prove they were exactly who they said they were.
In the years after the Cold War ended, more pieces of Yelena Sokova's work surfaced through declassified files and talks with former intelligence officers. Yet most of her life still sits behind a wall of secrecy. The KGB archives, at least the parts that remain and can be reached, hold material that has never seen daylight. And chances are high that the full picture of her mission, the reasons that pushed her into it, and the way her story ended will stay unknown. What people do know is that she moved inside a huge hidden struggle that unfolded not only on world stages, but also inside quiet homes, office hallways, and parking lots outside elementary schools. It was a conflict measured not only by global tensions, but by the broken people who stumbled into the fallout. And the question that still hangs in the air, the one that never got a clean answer, is simple. What did Yelena Sokova believe she was fighting for? Maybe she was a true believer in communist ideals, convinced that the Soviet Union offered a better path for humanity, and that her work, even when it forced her into dark choices, served that vision. Or maybe she was shaped by a system that spotted her early, trained her hard, and used her as a tool, someone who carried out orders because she had been conditioned to do that and not think too long about the harm it caused. The truth probably sits somewhere between those two ideas, a blend of belief, duty, and the mental walls people build to keep doing things that hurt others while still telling themselves they are doing the right thing. What cannot be argued is that she chose her path, and that choice created waves she never expected, waves that reached people who never asked to be part of her world. David Harper spent years in therapy trying to understand what had been done to him, trying to rebuild trust and figure out who he was after the depth of that betrayal. Emily Harper, old enough to hold a handful of memories, grew up with anger mixed with confusion. She could never match the mother who read her bedtime stories and braided her hair with the woman who walked away without looking back. Michael Harper, too young to remember her at all, carried only the empty space where a mother should have been and the hard fact that she chose to leave him behind. In the end, the story of Yelena Sokova is about the price of deception and what happens when duty and ideology collide with real human ties. It shows how the Cold War, for all its political layers, still came down to single people making single choices. Some choices looked brave, some looked tragic, some made no sense at all. And there is no clean ending or clear lesson here, because espionage in that era was tangled, harsh, and full of moral shadows. People in that world were rarely saints or monsters. Most were just ordinary souls pulled into something far bigger than they ever expected, pushed along by fear, duty, or confusion. They tried to make choices with half-formed facts and loyalties that pulled them in opposite directions. On that Friday morning in October 1983, Anna Harper stepped out of her house and vanished. She never crossed that doorway again, and the weight of that moment has carried through the decades. It still sits with the people she left behind, shaping their lives in quiet ways. It lingers in the files of intelligence agencies that continue to sort through scattered notes and faded reports, hoping to understand what she did and what drove her to walk away. Over time, Anna turned into a kind of myth, a ghost tied to a conflict that marked an entire generation. To some, she became a warning. To others, a puzzle that no one has been able to solve. Whatever life she managed to build after that morning, she carried the knowledge that she had crossed a line she could never return from. She lived each day knowing she had betrayed the people who believed in her, and that no apology or explanation could undo it. That path was sealed the moment she closed her front door for the last time. The case is still technically open, though almost no one expects new evidence now. David Harper died in 2019. He never remarried, and he spent his final years as a quiet, withdrawn man who avoided talking about what happened. He held his bitterness close, as if letting it go would somehow erase the small pieces of his life that still made sense to him. Emily and Michael Harper, now in their late 40s, have refused interview requests again and again. They preferred to leave those old wounds untouched, choosing silence over reopening a story that never gave them answers. And somewhere, if she is still breathing, Yelena Sokolova would be in her late 70s. She would be living under a different name somewhere in the former Soviet Union, carrying the memories of a life that always felt slightly out of focus. She would remember the family she once claimed and the role she played, knowing that much of it had been built on lies or half-truths. Maybe she tries not to think about it. Maybe she thinks about it every day. This is the story of a woman who walked away, the people who had to live with the fallout, and the questions that time has refused to answer.